Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The bells of St. Augustine Church tolled slowly, heavily, as if each echo were deliberately striking straight into Claire Bennett's chest. The sound rolled beneath the high vaulted ceiling, bounced off rows of crowded wooden pews, then spilled into air thick with the scent of candles and white flowers. A fragrance chosen to feel pure, yet now suffocating, as if the ritual itself were choking her. Claire stood at the altar directly beneath a honey-colored shaft of light falling from the stained glass window above. The wedding dress, borrowed from a distant relative, was slightly too tight across the chest and a little too loose at the waist, as if it had been tailored for another life, a life she didn't belong to. She gripped a bouquet of white roses so hard the delicate petals began to crease. The thorns had been cut, but the rough stubs still scraped against the skin of her icy palm. She didn't dare turn around to face all 83 people behind her. She only heard them, the breaths, the shifting, the whispers thickening by the second. He's probably just stuck in traffic. A woman's voice tried to laugh, laughing to save the mood. Or he changed his mind, someone blurted, then quickly lowered their voice as if afraid of committing a sin. Claire swallowed hard. Her throat burned with dryness, even though she kept reminding herself to breathe slowly, deeply. Breathe like a woman about to step into the happiest moment of her life. In the front row, Ella Bennett, her daughter, swung her legs in a tiny cream-colored dress, her hair slightly crooked under a flower crown, like she'd been running around the waiting room for too long. The little girl looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. Unconditional trust, the kind only children have, as if the whole world were built out of the promise that there will be cake. "Mommy," Ella whispered, not noticing anything unusual. "When do I get to eat cake?" Claire's heart cinched tight, like someone had drawn a thin but sharp wire across her chest. She smiled at her daughter, a smile just steady enough to reassure, just steady enough not to shatter. "Soon, sweetheart," she whispered back, as if speaking louder might make the truth hit the floor and break. To the left of the altar, Sophie Bennett, her sister, stood close, a hand braced on Claire's elbow as if keeping her from falling. Sophie wasn't wearing anything glamorous, just a simple dark blue dress, but her eyes were as sharp as a blade already drawn. She checked her watch for Claire didn't even know how many times. "Claire," Sophie ground out, her lips barely moving. "It's been 15 minutes. No one is stuck in traffic this long." Claire didn't answer. She stared straight at the empty space where Ryan Cole was supposed to be standing. It was empty in a way that felt absurd. So empty she could feel the entire church staring at that emptiness, and through it, staring straight through her. She tried to remember that moment that morning when Ryan had called, his voice warm and light, saying he was on his way, saying today is our day. He spoke like a man about to become her husband. He spoke like the man who'd played with Ella in the living room last week, who'd let the little girl call him daddy while laughing. And then, the text. It had arrived an hour before the ceremony, sitting in her phone like a cold stone. Claire hadn't dared read it all. She'd only skimmed the beginning, the way someone skims past a blade pressed close to skin and pretends it isn't there. Now that message burned hot in her memory, each word catching fire. She pulled her phone from her small clutch, fingers trembling. The screen lit up. The name Ryan appeared, familiar and betraying. She opened it, and this time she read the whole thing. "I can't do it, Claire. I can't carry someone else's responsibility. I'm sorry." One sentence, one strike. Not long, no explanation, no negotiation. Just a cold refusal, sent at the exact moment she stood in the middle of the church, in the light, under the gaze of everyone. "No!" Claire heard her own voice, but it sounded like it came from very far away. She didn't cry right then. She only felt the blood drain from her face, as if someone had opened an invisible door and pulled every bit of warmth from her body. Sophie snatched the phone, read quickly, and her face went pale with rage. "That bastard," Sophie breathed, her voice low but shaking. "He dares." "Sophie!" Claire cut her off, not to defend Ryan, but to stop her sister from exploding right here. She didn't want Ella to hear. She didn't want her daughter to remember her mother's wedding day as the day adults screamed inside a church. But the whispers still grew. The room began to move with its own rhythm, the rhythm of waiting turning into the rhythm of curiosity. Claire felt people's stares sliding across her back like cold, wet strings. The priest stood nearby, an older man with kind eyes, looking at her with a pity sharp enough to make Claire want to disappear. Pity hurt more than anger. "My child," he began, then stopped, as if he didn't know what words could possibly be right. Claire suddenly realized the humiliation didn't come from Ryan leaving. It came from standing here in a borrowed dress, holding a cheap bouquet, in front of 83 people, like living proof that a woman with a child was always something to be weighed and measured. Someone else's responsibility, a burden. Just one word, other, and it was enough to make her unworthy. Ella asked again, a little louder this time, "Mommy, where is Ryan?" Her daughter's question fell like the final drop of water. It wasn't cruel, it was simply true. And that truth made Claire's eyes burn. She bent down and took Ella's tiny hand. Her daughter's hand was warm, soft, trusting. Claire squeezed gently, clinging to the only thing that hadn't betrayed her. "Sweetheart," Claire said, her voice rough, we're going to go home early, okay?" "But the cake!" Ella blinked, her lower lip pushing out a little. Claire tried to smile. She brushed Ella's cheek, wiping away a streak of makeup that had accidentally dusted her daughter's skin. She felt tears hanging at her lashes like a thin thread, one hard breath away from snapping. "Mommy will buy you cake," she promised. "Lots of cake." Sophie immediately stepped in, almost wrapping her body around both mother and child, as if shielding them from every stare. "Go," Sophie said close to Claire's ear, her voice firm as a nail being driven in. "We're getting out of here. Right now." Claire nodded, her throat swollen shut. She bent and lifted Ella into her arms. The wedding dress dragged across the marble floor, the rustle sounding like paper being torn. The bouquet trembled in her hand, petals fluttering down onto the white floor like snow. Beauty, broken into pieces. She turned her back on the altar and walked toward the large doors. Each step felt like passing through a different layer of air, thicker, heavier. She heard the creak of pews, the tilt of heads turning to follow her, someone sighing, a small laugh swallowed too quickly, a soft, poor thing that slipped out and vanished at once. Claire kept her spine straight. She didn't allow herself to tremble. She didn't allow herself to collapse in front of her daughter. But just as she reached the last step before the exit, the heavy wooden door at the back of the church, a door so weighty it usually took two people to push, suddenly burst open. The sound thundered through the enclosed space. Bam! The entire church fell silent. The whispers died in everyone's throats. Claire froze. Even Ella went still in her arms, looking up with the instinctive attention children give to something too big. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and car exhaust, making the candles on the altar flicker. A man stepped inside. He was tall. His pace wasn't rushed, yet every step carried its own weight. A charcoal vest fit cleanly over broad shoulders, the cut so sharp it made people think of a blade hidden under fabric. His face was handsome in a dangerous way. Not the kind of beauty that puts others at ease, but the kind that triggers a warning in the blood. His eyes were dark and calm, not searching, not surprised, not confused, as if he knew exactly what he would find the moment he walked in. Two men in suits followed him and took positions on either side of the door, silent as shadows. And in that instant, Claire understood why the entire room had gone so still. It wasn't politeness. It was because this man brought something invisible with him. Pressure, authority, power that didn't need to shout to make people hold their breath. He stopped in the center aisle. His gaze swept the room quickly, then landed on Claire. As if, in a room full of people, he saw only one. Claire tightened her arms around Ella. Sophie stepped forward half a step, placing herself in front of them, like a lioness ready to bite anything that came too close. The man looked at Claire for one more second, a second so long she could hear her own heartbeat. Then he spoke. His voice was low, his English clear and cold like metal pulled from ice water. Claire Bennett! Claire went rigid. She had never met him. She was certain of it. And yet he said her name like she'd been on his list for a long time. And in that moment, Claire understood. The door that had just opened hadn't only let a man into the church, it had opened into another life. Claire was still standing on the steps near the door, Ella in her arms, Sophie blocking half her body in front of her like a living wall. The entire church held its breath. The candles trembled as a cold draft rushed in, making the shadows on the walls sway like smeared ink. The man who had just called her name, Adrian Karpenko, stood in the middle of the aisle, so calm that it made the chaos inside Claire burn even hotter. Calm as if he were the only one not surprised by the groom running away, not surprised by the tears about to fall, not surprised by the stench of humiliation spreading through a place meant for vows. "Who are you?" Sophie snapped first, her voice sharp as shattered glass. "You have no right." Adrian didn't look at Sophie right away. He looked at Claire. It wasn't the look of a man used to ordering around someone weaker. It was the look of someone measuring the distance between an explosion and the people standing too close to it. Then he stepped forward. Not fast, not slow, but with every step, the space in the church seemed to part on its own. Two men in suits behind him spread out, positioning themselves along the aisle like anchors, touching no one, pushing no one, simply present enough to make everyone stop moving. Claire felt her skin go cold. Part of her wanted to clutch Ella and run straight out, wedding dress be damned. But another part, hard as stone, forged through years of single motherhood, forced her to stay still. If this was a storm, she needed to know where it came from, how strong it was, and where her child should stand so she wouldn't be swept away. Adrian stopped a few steps from her, close enough for Claire to catch the scent of expensive cologne, clean and deep, but far enough not to feel invasive. He glanced briefly at the crushed bouquet in her hands, then back up at her face, her eyes red, her lips trembling, but her back still straight. "Ryan Cole," Adrian said, his voice low and clear, carrying just far enough for the entire room to hear without him raising it. "He owes me a very large sum of money." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into water. Instantly, a wave of murmuring rose, then died just as fast. One of Adrian's men merely turned his head to look, and the murmurs were strangled into silence. Claire felt her heart pound painfully. "What are you talking about?" "He ran," Adrian continued without detour. "Not just from the wedding. He ran from his debt." For a moment, Claire thought she must have misheard. She had prepared herself for abandonment because of her child, because of pressure, because of cowardice. But debt was a different word. Debt was mud. Debt was darkness. Debt was something people hid beneath the polished surface of family, the surface Claire had believed in. "No," Claire blurted, her voice hoarse, torn. "That's impossible. Ryan, he was he was the man who held Ella's hand crossing the street, the man who fixed the broken faucet, the man who looked at Claire and said, 'I accept both of you.'" Claire suddenly felt like laughing, a laugh like a slap. She remembered the times Ryan talked about work being tight, the way he dodged when she asked if the wedding finances were okay, the way he squeezed her hand as if holding tight enough could smother another truth. She understood then. She was never family to Ryan. She was a coat, a legal shell, a curtain. Heat rushed to her face. Claire stepped down one step, Ella still in her arms, but her gaze had changed. "So what are you doing here? Collecting debts in a church? In front of my child?" She wanted to lash Adrian with words, to tear open that calm and see what was inside. "What do you think I am? Part of the property Ryan abandoned?" Adrian didn't smirk. He didn't soften his tone to coax her. He spoke straight to the point, like fastening a safety line around someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "You're not involved," he said, each word landing solidly, "but you and your daughter are standing in the line of fire, not just from me, but from others. Besides me, Ryan owes many people." The air seemed to freeze. Claire heard a faint, "Oh my God," somewhere among the pews. Sophie swore under her breath. The priest gripped his Bible as if it were the only thing anchoring him. "Are you threatening me?" Claire asked. Her throat tightened, but her eyes didn't look away. Life had pushed her into corners before. The most terrifying thing wasn't being threatened, it was not knowing where the threat came from. I'm warning you, Adrian said, meeting her gaze. Sophie stepped forward, her shoulders taut like a drawn bow. If you hurt my sister or my niece, I'm not here to hurt them, Adrian cut in. This time he looked at Sophie, his gaze not hostile, just cold and firm. I'm here to stop that from happening. One of Adrian's men subtly tilted his head, a hand brushing his ear as if listening to something through a comm. They didn't rush in. They didn't grab anyone. They didn't draw weapons. Instead, two men moved toward the church doors and gently pulled them closed. Not locking them like a prison, just closing them enough to prevent panicked chaos, enough to keep the situation from turning into a stampede. Another man stood near the aisle and made a small gesture to the guests. Stay seated and you'll be safe. That kind of control was frightening in a different way. No violence, yet the entire room obeyed. Claire felt Ella shift slightly in her arms. The child looked at Adrian, not with adult fear, but with instinctive curiosity. Mommy, Ella whispered. Who is that man? Claire was about to pull Ella closer, to hide her face in her shoulder, but Adrian did something that made her freeze. He lowered himself. Not a dramatic kneel, just enough to bring his eyes level with the child's. The two men behind him tensed instantly, protective instincts flaring, but Adrian raised one finger in a silent signal to stay put. Then he looked at Ella, his voice changing. Still deep, but softer, as if he knew children didn't listen to threats. They listened to truth. Hi, he said. What's your name? Ella blinked, then answered like a child taught to be polite. My name is Ella. Adrian nodded slightly as if committing something important to memory. Then he looked up at Claire. May I say a few things to her? Not I will say, but may I? A simple request. But from this man, it sounded like a declaration of boundaries he set for himself. Claire stared at him. She didn't trust easily, but she couldn't deny this. If he meant harm, he wouldn't be asking. Fine, Claire said stiffly, but you speak right in front of me? Of course. Adrian turned back to Ella. Are you hungry? Ella immediately remembered the most important thing. Yes, I want cake. A few scattered laughs broke out in the church. Laughter born of tension, laughter because a child had unintentionally dragged the entire room back to ordinary life. Claire nearly cried just from hearing it. Then Adrian said something very calmly, as if he were promising something he fully intended to keep. You'll still have cake, Adrian said. You'll still have cake today. That sentence made Claire both angry and choked up. Angry because he was inserting himself into her ruined wedding day as if he had the right to arrange it. Choked up because, in the moment when the whole world had abandoned her, a stranger chose to remember the one thing that made a child happy. Not money, not power, just cake. Ella nodded solemnly. You promise? Adrian nodded back, unwavering. I promise. Claire watched the scene like a piece that didn't belong in the picture. It didn't immediately make her trust Adrian, but it reshaped her fear. Instead of fearing he was a monster, she began to fear that he was complicated, and complicated people were the hardest to predict. Adrian stood. As he straightened, the pressure in the room returned instantly, as if he himself carried an invisible switch. He looked at Claire again, not avoiding the humiliation clinging to her like dust. He didn't say, I pity you. He didn't say, I care. He didn't use anything that made her feel smaller. He offered a solution, cold and clean, like an exit drawn with a ruler. I'll be clear, Adrian said, lowering his voice slightly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Ryan is gone. The people he owes will look for the easiest thing to take. That's you and your daughter. Sophie snapped, so what do you want? Adrian didn't hesitate. A legal marriage. The entire church seemed to drop into empty space. Claire felt her hand go numb. You're insane. No, Adrian said, infuriatingly calm. I'm practical. He looked straight at her. If you are my legal wife, you and your child will be under my protection. No one else will dare touch you. Every consequence Ryan left behind will end here. Claire laughed, but it shattered in her throat. And the price? Adrian paused for a beat, as if choosing his words carefully so he wouldn't turn her into an object with his answer. Then he said clearly, "The price is that you agree to stand beside me, legally, before the law and before everyone's eyes. I don't need you to love me today. I need you to survive today." Claire's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it. She looked at Ella, curled against her shoulder, eyes on Adrian like a child looking at a stranger who promised cake. She looked at Sophie, shaking with rage and fear. She looked at the faces in the church, no longer smiling, only stunned and curious. And she looked at Adrian, a man who walked in at the exact moment she shattered, who made the most insane offer of her life, yet spoke with the voice of someone placing a coat over her shoulders in a storm. Claire opened her mouth to refuse, but before the words could leave her lips, Adrian added one more sentence, softer, lower, as if meant only for her. "Claire Bennett," he said, "I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came here to end that humiliation." And in that moment, Claire understood. The church doors had opened onto a different life. The question was that life an escape or the most beautiful trap ever set? No. Claire's no came out so fast she surprised herself that her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't a gentle refusal. It was a stake driven into the ground, a final instinct to protect what she still had left, her dignity. And Ella. Sophie looked like someone had lit a match inside her. "That's enough," Sophie shouted, whipping around toward the pews, eyes blazing red. "Somebody call the police, right now. This is kidnapping. This is a threat." A few people flinched. Someone reached for a phone. The murmurs flared up like fire catching dry straw. The priest took half a step forward, one hand lifting as if to intervene. But even he didn't know how to intervene. Adrian didn't move. He didn't smile either. No mocking smirk like the police can't help you. No arrogant display of power. He simply stood there, so calm that the panic around him looked out of place. "Go ahead," he said evenly, not challenging. "But understand one thing before you do." Sophie choked on her rage. "What?" Adrian looked at Sophie, then shifted his gaze to Claire, as if every answer needed to be spoken to the woman holding her child, not to the crowd. "Ryan Cole dragged too many people into trouble," Adrian said. "Some of them didn't come here to talk. They came to take something they can turn into cash, and they'll start with whatever matters least to them." Claire's spine went ice cold. "Matters least?" "The person he left behind." Adrian's voice stayed blunt. "You!" Sophie shot back. "She has nothing to do with it." "In a normal world, you'd be right." Adrian didn't argue. "But in the world he just provoked. Whether you're involved or not isn't the important question anymore. The question is, are you easy to take?" One of Adrian's men near the door tilted his head slightly and spoke into a radio. No one drew a gun. No one raised their voice. But Claire understood. The most dangerous thing wasn't shouting. The most dangerous thing was certainty. Claire looked down at Ella. The little girl was resting her head against her mother's shoulder, small fingers fiddling with her hair clip, completely unaware of what the world behind Ryan even meant. And that was exactly what tightened Claire's throat. Ella shouldn't have to stand in the middle of this. She shouldn't have to become the price for another man's mistakes. "Are you using my child to force me?" Claire asked, fighting to keep her voice from breaking. Adrian met her eyes. "No." He paused as if choosing his words. "I'm telling you, so you don't lie to yourself and think walking out of this church makes it over. If you step outside without a shield, you'll be stepping straight into their line of sight." "Shield," Claire repeated bitterly, "and that shield is you." "A legal condition," Adrian corrected calmly. "A lawful name placed in front of you and your child. A protection system. A boundary other people won't dare cross." Claire let out a dry laugh. "Sounds like a prison painted gold." This time, something in Adrian's eyes darkened slightly. Not anger, but an understanding of what she was afraid of. When he spoke again, his voice didn't soften, but there was something like acknowledgement in it. "If you agree, it will be a contract," he said, "not a cage." Sophie was still shaking with fury, but Claire lifted a hand, a small, decisive gesture. Sophie fell silent immediately, though her eyes still burned. Claire took a deep breath. She looked at Adrian, at the way he didn't take another step, didn't try to touch her, didn't try to convince her with force, and she chose the only thing she could do right now. Pull this out of public view, away from the eyes, away from humiliation. Where? Claire asked sharply. Adrian understood at once. A small room on the side of the church, he answered. There's a door. I can have one of my women stand outside if you want. Claire nodded once. Sophie comes with me. Of course. Claire set Ella down. The little girl clung to her mother's neck like a tiny hook. Sophie immediately took Claire's hand, as if letting go would mean Claire would be swallowed whole. They followed Adrian down the narrow side hallway of the church. Adrian's shoes clicked on the stone floor, dry, steady, like a countdown. Behind them, the church remained silent, as if left behind glass. The small room held only a wooden table, 3 chairs, and a narrow window looking out into the yard. A simple cross hung on the wall, a place meant for confession, today turned into a place for negotiation. Adrian stood near the door instead of sitting right away, as if he wanted Claire to feel he wasn't taking her space. A woman dressed in black stood out in the hallway, her back turned to give them privacy. Sophie rolled her eyes, but at least it was a woman. Claire placed Ella on a chair. The little girl pouted. Cake? Soon, sweetheart, Claire whispered, kissing her forehead. Sit here with Aunt Sophie, okay? Ella nodded, then leaned into Sophie, her small palm gripping her aunt's hand like it was something familiar. Claire turned back to Adrian. You want a contract, then I set the terms. Her voice changed. She wasn't the abandoned bride anymore. She wasn't the woman trembling in front of power. This was the voice of a mother who'd argued with landlords over rent, negotiated with doctors over bills, stayed up all night watching her child breathe through an asthma attack. Claire knew how to stand upright when no one else stood for her. Ella is the absolute priority, Claire said, each word clear. No one gets to touch her without my consent. No protection turns into control. Adrian nodded once. Agreed. No forcing us to share a room, Claire continued, meeting his eyes. No forcing intimacy. No demanding I play wife in the sense of that. Sophie exhaled faintly, as if a piece of her finally unclenched. Adrian didn't frown. He simply answered evenly. Agreed? I continue school, Claire said, her voice tightening, because this was what she feared most would be taken from her. I'm in nursing school. I don't drop out. I don't want my life to depend completely on anyone, including you. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes like respect. Agreed. And every decision involving Ella, Claire emphasized, requires my signature. School, doctors, where we live, and her schedule. I'm not handing over my rights as her mother to anyone. Adrian watched her for a long beat, then nodded. Agreed. Claire held her breath, expecting him to bargain, to laugh, to say, you're asking too much. But Adrian did none of it. He pulled a stack of papers from his vest pocket, prepared as if he'd predicted she would need this. Claire felt her throat tighten again, because it was both frightening and proof he'd thought through doing everything legally. He set the papers on the table. A pen was placed neatly beside them. What else do you want to add? Adrian asked. Claire stared at the documents. You had this ready? I'm always prepared, Adrian said simply. But the terms will change according to what you want, not what I want. Sophie snorted. Sounds real nice. Adrian didn't react to the sarcasm. He only looked at Claire, as if Sophie could hate him all she wanted. What mattered was whether Claire felt safe. Claire lowered her gaze and read. Dry legal language, but she understood the key lines. Lawful marriage, protective rights, financial commitment, no coercion. Then she stopped. One line had been added at the bottom of the page, the ink looking newer. Claire Bennett has the right to terminate the agreement if she feels unsafe. Claire looked up at Adrian, her expression sharp and confused at the same time. This, she said, her voice going hoarse. You added this? Yes, Adrian answered. Why? Claire asked. You could clearly force it. You have men. You have power. You have everything. Adrian met her gaze. Because if you feel trapped, you'll become a woman who slowly dies inside a cage. I don't want that. You don't want it, Sophie echoed, full of suspicion. Or you don't want the trouble. Adrian's eyes shifted to Sophie for a second. You can hate me, he said calmly, but don't teach me how to treat children and women. I have my own principles. Claire's heart skipped in an uneven beat. Principles. A crime boss talking about principles inside a church. It sounded absurd, but his eyes didn't allow her to dismiss it as empty words. Claire tightened her hands. She looked at Ella, leaning against Sophie, eyes half-lidded, unaware that her mother was standing in front of a decision that could change her entire life. Then what do you want in exchange? Claire asked, dragging herself back to reality. A wife on paper? An image? Something you can use? Adrian was silent for a beat, then spoke plainly, like a negotiation he didn't need to disguise. In exchange, you will stand beside me, legally, in front of the people looking for you, in front of the people who want to exploit you. He looked at Claire, his voice dropping lower. And you won't run alone anymore. It sounded like a promise, but Claire had heard too many promises from men. She didn't trust words. She trusted terms. She inhaled deeply and placed her hand on the papers. Let's be clear, Claire said. A contract, not a cage. You sign these terms. If you violate them, I leave. Adrian nodded. I'll sign. He signed right in front of her. The signature was decisive, without hesitation. Sophie still watched him like a velvet-covered knife, but Claire looked at that signature like an anchor. Not because she believed he was a good man, but because she knew. When everything is dark, the law is the only thing that can be built into a fence. Claire picked up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly. She looked at Ella one more time. Then she signed. Ink soaked into paper. Just a thin line of ink, but it felt like drawing a new boundary across her life. Adrian stood, then stepped back half a pace as if returning space to Claire. You won't have to decide anything else today, he said. Just step out and stand beside me. The rest, I'll handle. Claire closed her eyes for a single second. She heard the murmur outside again. She felt the 83 pairs of eyes waiting. She saw the borrowed wedding dress like a reminder of humiliation. But when she opened her eyes, something had changed in her gaze. She wasn't the abandoned bride anymore. Claire lifted Ella into her arms. Sophie took her hand. They walked out into the hallway. The small door opened. The sound of the church rushed in like a wave. Claire stepped into the aisle again. Not to wait for Ryan, not to be pitied, but to choose how to survive, standing tall, holding her child, and walking into a life she didn't understand yet. But at least, she was no longer entering it through weakness. Adrian was waiting at the head of the aisle. He didn't touch her. He only dipped his head slightly like a reminder. You chose, and I will keep my part. And this time Claire walked toward him, not because she was being pulled, but because she stepped forward on her own. Now Claire couldn't remember how she walked toward the altar. She only remembered the feeling of the borrowed wedding dress dragging across the marble floor, the cheap bouquet now drooping like a belated apology. And she remembered the silence behind her, a silence that was no longer curious but something stranger, belonging to people who had just witnessed a massive crack and didn't yet know which way it would collapse. Adrian stood there, exactly where Ryan should have been. Beneath the stained glass, he looked like a dark silhouette with sharp, unmistakable edges, an existence that required no explanation. The priest looked at them as if they were facing something not in the ceremony book. He glanced at the papers laid out on the small table beside him, then at Claire, then at Adrian, as if asking, "Are you sure?" Claire held Ella in her arms. Ella was still excited, as if the church were simply a place with pleasant bells and cake at the end. She tilted her head up at Adrian, then looked back at her mother. "Mommy, cake?" Ella asked again, loyal to the most important thing in a child's world. Sophie stood below, her eyes locked on Adrian, ready to lunge if he made a single wrong move. But Claire no longer had the strength to register the gaze of 83 people. She saw only Ella, and she saw her own signature, a thin line of ink, yet heavy as fate. Adrian bent slightly, speaking softly to Ella, just loud enough for Claire to hear. "Can you stand with Aunt Sophie for a bit?" He looked up at Claire, his eyes asking an unspoken question. May I? Claire nodded. Sophie instinctively took Ella, holding the child close to her chest. Ella didn't resist, just wrapped her arms around Sophie's neck, eyes still bright. When will there be cake? Ella asked immediately. Very soon, Adrian replied. You'll be the first one to cut it. Ella giggled, as if that promise were the most certain thing in the room. Claire stood beside Adrian. The warmth from his body didn't touch her, but his presence seemed to create its own atmosphere, enough to completely silence the earlier whispers. The priest found his voice again, careful, as if walking on ice. We will proceed, he said, clearly still unsettled, but also a man who understood that sometimes the human heart needs a ritual to stand up after breaking. The wedding was absurdly brief. There were no long vows, no emotional applause, no tears of happiness like Claire had once imagined. Just the ceremonial questions, the nods, the I do's, spoken in voices strained to stay steady. Claire said I do in a voice that sounded unfamiliar even to herself. Not because she believed in love, but because she believed in something else. If she collapsed, Ella would collapse with her. Adrian said I do in a firm, even tone. No performance, no attempt to make it sound romantic. He spoke like a man promising something he fully intended to carry out. The rings appeared like something unreal, a small box delivered by one of Adrian's men, so fast it made Claire's skin prickle. The ring wasn't ostentatious. Smooth platinum, a small stone, clear and bright, just enough to catch the stained glass light and throw a streak of sparkle across Claire's hand, like a fallen star. When Adrian took her hand, his fingers were warm and steady. He didn't squeeze or grip, only supported it, as if lifting something fragile. The ring slid onto Claire's finger perfectly, a fit that made her more uneasy than comforted. Too prepared, too precise. The priest hesitated for a beat before the final familiar line. You may kiss the bride. In that moment, Claire felt her heart stop. She had thought about everything: dignity, safety, legality, money, the darkness after Ryan. But she hadn't thought about something this simple and bare. Adrian turned to look at her. Not the look of course I'll kiss you, but a questioning look, a very clear question without words. Do you want this? Is this okay? Claire swallowed. Part of her screamed, this is insane. Another part felt something strange. If he were a trap, he wouldn't have asked. If he were a hunter, he wouldn't have paused. She nodded just barely enough for herself to know she had agreed. Adrian leaned down. The kiss was only a light touch, a seal placed on a promise to keep boundaries. No claiming, no forcing, no lingering. Just a moment, enough for the entire church to understand. On paper, they were husband and wife. The rest, no one knew yet. When he pulled back, Adrian held her gaze for a beat, then said quietly, for her alone, thank you. The words sent a numbness through Claire. Below them, scattered applause broke out, uneven, uncertain. Some clapped out of confusion, some out of fear, some out of curiosity. But Ella clapped the hardest, cheering, cake, cake! And strangely enough, real laughter bubbled up from somewhere. Just a little, but enough to ease the suffocating air. The wedding reception was moved. Claire couldn't remember how she agreed to the change. She only remembered stepping out of the church and seeing a line of sleek black cars waiting, like a scene from a film where she wasn't the lead actress, but someone thrown into the frame. Adrian arranged everything with cold, efficient order. Those who wanted to leave were allowed to leave. No one was detained, but they left safely. One of Adrian's men escorted them to the steps, opened doors, guided them, like a different kind of farewell ritual, a send-off meant to prevent trouble, to keep chaos from multiplying. Most of Ryan's family vanished quickly, faces pale as paper. Claire's small circle, Sophie, an elderly aunt, a few friends, stayed, unable to abandon her, and also unsure what else to do. At the small hotel Claire had booked to save money, the reception space still looked like her dream. Strings of warm lights, baby's breath flowers, a 3-tier cake. But now everything felt like a stage where the props remained while the actors had switched roles. Adrian entered, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Security stood at the edges of the room like planted stakes, not threatening anyone, but enough to make everyone instinctively lower their voices. Ella ran straight to the cake, eyes sparkling like fireworks. "Can I cut the cake?" Adrian crouched down, serious, like a man being entrusted with the most important task of his life. "Yes," he said, "but you have to eat your real meal first, then cake." Ella's eyes widened. "Huh?" "Yes," Adrian nodded. "Your mom will agree." Ella turned to Claire for help. Claire looked at her daughter, then at Adrian. She didn't want to hear herself agreeing to anything involving him. But this was right. "That's right, sweetheart," Claire said, her voice softening slightly. "Eat first." Ella pouted for a second, then smiled again. "Then I'll eat fast." A laugh escaped Sophie, her first of the day, carrying a hint of relief. The reception continued in a strange way. Not joyful, but ongoing, like a river forced into a new course, yet still flowing. Claire sat at the main table, Ella beside her, Adrian across from her. The distance between them was enough to avoid contact, yet close enough for Claire to feel the pressure of the world he carried. She looked around and felt as if she were standing between two shores. One shore was familiar poverty, the small apartment, next month's rent, cafe shifts, nights counting loose change. The other shore was Adrian's world, glossy black cars, men in suits, power that didn't need to speak loudly. Claire wasn't sure which shore was more frightening. Sophie leaned in close to her ear. "Are you okay?" Claire was about to say no, but then Ella laughed. The child was eating, talking, proudly telling one of Claire's friends that Uncle Alex promised cake, as if it were the greatest achievement imaginable. Claire swallowed it back. "I'm okay for now," she said. "For her." While everyone was distracted by food and background music, Adrian leaned toward Claire. His voice was so low that only she could hear. "I don't need you to perform," he said. "I need you to be safe." Claire turned to look at him. Those words frightened her more than they reassured her, because if they were an act, she would know how to resist. But his tone didn't sound like acting. It sounded like a man accustomed to giving orders, choosing truth instead. "Why are you doing this?" Claire asked hoarsely. "Don't say it's kindness." Adrian looked at her for a beat, then answered simply, "Because I allowed Ryan to get close to you." Claire froze. "What?" Adrian didn't explain further here. He only added, as if closing the conversation before it turned into a new wound. "Eat. You haven't eaten since this morning." And the worst part was, he was right. Claire hadn't eaten. She'd been running on adrenaline and humiliation, on instinct and fear. That simple concern made her throat tighten again, as if her body were betraying her vigilance. When the reception ended, Ella had fallen asleep on Sophie's shoulder, one hand still smeared with cake frosting. Claire carried her into the car, deliberately avoiding the luxury of the interior. Cream leather, clean scent, soft lighting. She was afraid that if she looked too closely, she would believe this was real and fall harder when it shattered. Adrian sat beside her, not touching her, only giving the driver a brief address. The car rolled out of the small town, away from streets Claire knew by every pothole and curve. Streetlights grew sparse. The darkness beyond the windows deepened. "Where are we going?" Claire asked, still holding Ella. Adrian looked at her. "Home." She almost laughed at how strange the word home sounded, but the car turned onto a long road leading to a tall iron gate. The gate opened silently. The car drove along a gravel path, flanked by rows of precisely trimmed trees, an unspoken answer carved in money and power. Then the building appeared. No, not a house, a mansion. Warm, yellow light spilled from large windows like watching eyes. Claire stepped out, her legs weakening. Adrian lifted Ella, an action that made Claire tense with the instinct to pull her child back. But Ella was asleep, her head resting on Adrian's shoulder as if trusting. Adrian looked at Claire for a beat, giving her a chance to say, "Let me." But she didn't. She simply followed, her heart pounding like a drum. Inside, the polished stone floors reflected the chandelier light like falling stars. The space was so vast it made Claire feel smaller. She didn't know whether she was entering a refuge or a cage. Adrian went up the stairs, turned into a long hallway, and stopped in front of a door painted a pale purple. Claire's heart jolted. He pushed the door open. The room inside was softly lit, warm, and purple. Not a loud purple, but a lavender hue like late afternoon. There was a canopy bed, a corner arranged with new toys, a children's bookshelf, and a unicorn plush toy placed neatly on the pillow. Ella could sleep here and believe she belonged. Claire stood frozen in the doorway. She couldn't believe her eyes. "You!" Her voice broke. "How did you know?" Adrian laid Ella down on the bed, very carefully. He pulled up the blanket, removed the flower crown from her hair, and placed it in a drawer, as if it were something precious. Then he turned back to Claire, his voice low, calm, as if all of this were self-evident. "Children need a sense of belonging," he said. "I didn't want her to feel like she was dragged into a strange place." Claire felt her nose sting, because that didn't sound like the words of a predator. It sounded like the words of someone who had once been a child with nowhere to belong. And in that moment, Claire's fear changed shape once again. It was no longer just fear of being harmed. It was fear that she was standing before a dangerous man who knew exactly how to be gentle in the right places. And somehow, that was more dangerous than anything else. If the church was where Claire was abandoned in front of the whole world, then this mansion was where she was swallowed by silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from being broke. The silence of a cramped apartment where the refrigerator's buzz is the soundtrack of your life. The silence here was expensive, thick as carpet, clean as glass, and so vast that Claire's footsteps sounded misplaced, like someone wandering into a museum after closing. She stood in the grand entryway, still wearing the wrinkled borrowed wedding dress, still holding fear the way you hold a heavy bag. Adrian had just put Ella down in the purple room. The little girl was fast asleep, one arm wrapped around her new unicorn, as if the only thing worth worrying about in the world was whether she'd get a tea party tomorrow. Claire, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. Sophie was somewhere behind her, given a room near Claire's at Adrian's instruction, a detail that made Claire feel both relieved and wary. Sophie didn't trust him. Claire didn't either. But the fact that he let Sophie stay didn't separate them, said at least one thing. He didn't need Claire alone to control her. A woman in a black uniform approached. She looked about 25, hair in a neat bun, eyes lowered just enough to be respectful, not so low that she seemed submissive. "Ma'am, Claire," she said, hesitating slightly as if learning how to address her properly. "I'm Nadia. Mr. Karpenko assigned me to assist you during your first few days. If you need anything, please tell me." "I don't need assistance," Claire shot back, her voice dry. "I need to know whether I'm being kept here." Nadia paused, then answered with surprising bluntness. "No, ma'am. The doors aren't locked. He doesn't like locking doors on people in the household." People in the household? The phrase made Claire shiver. She didn't want to be in anyone's household. She walked to the front door and tried the handle. Not locked. She turned back to look down the long hallway, doors lining it like a luxury maze. She waited for that trapped feeling to slam into her. Cameras, snares, metal bolts. But what she got instead was emptiness. And that emptiness unsettled her more. If the door wasn't locked, that meant he was confident she couldn't run, or he truly didn't want to cage her. Adrian appeared without a sound, as if he stepped out of the stone itself. He'd changed out of his suit into a white dress shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to his wrists. Still, the posture of a man who always controlled the room, but less ceremonial. He saw Claire near the door. "You're checking?" he asked without judgment. "I'm making sure," Claire corrected, meeting his eyes. "I don't want Ella waking up somewhere with locks on the outside." Adrian nodded once. "No one locks your door. No one locks her door." Sophie came out from the hallway, arms crossed, cold as ice. "And the gate?" "There's security," Adrian said. "But not to keep you in, to keep other people out." Claire heard it, but it didn't comfort her. Because she knew, protection and captivity are sometimes separated only by what you call it. Adrian looked at Nadia. Please bring everyone to the living room. No one argued because no one really knew what else to do. The living room was massive, lit with warmer golden lamps, the sofa soft enough to swallow you whole. Claire still sat on the edge, back straight, hands clenched as if she might bolt at any second. Adrian stood in front of them instead of sitting down. He wasn't trying to create a scene that felt like a courtroom. He stood like a man laying down rules so the house wouldn't turn into a battlefield. Three things, Adrian said. House rules. Sophie gave a sharp, mocking laugh. House rules. You think you're a king? Adrian didn't react to the provocation. He spoke while looking at Claire, as if these rules were for her, not to prove power in front of Sophie. One, he said. No one gives Claire orders, not even my people. Claire paused. Nadia, standing off to the side, dipped her head slightly as if confirming. Two, Adrian continued. No one touches Ella without Claire's consent. Not picking her up to make it easier, not pulling her along to be quicker. No touching. Claire's throat tightened. In her life, people touched her daughter like an accessory, hugging, lifting, tugging her hand, and Claire was always forced to smile while staying on guard. Hearing a man say no touching that clearly was so strange it made her more cautious, not less. Three, Adrian said. Ella's routine is Claire's decision. School, bedtime, meals, doctors. If anyone has an opinion, they bring it to Claire. No going around her. Sophie went silent for a moment. For the first time since Adrian appeared, she didn't fire back immediately, because these rules were right, and right in a way that gave Sophie nothing obvious to attack. Claire narrowed her eyes at Adrian. You're doing this so I'll trust you? Adrian answered bluntly. I'm doing it so my people don't make you hate me more. Cold and real. I don't want you to trust me. I just want to minimize the damage. Claire realized something about him that was more dangerous than power. Discipline. Power can be hot, impulsive, performative. Discipline is cold, durable, and doesn't get knocked off course by emotion. A disciplined man can build an empire out of rules like this, and he can destroy everything too if he chooses. These rules, Adrian added, are in writing. Claire will have a copy. If anyone violates them, they're out of this house immediately. Nadia nodded lightly like it were obvious. Claire's heart sped up. She didn't know if she was being protected or being invited into a system where everything had a procedure. Adrian looked at Claire. Do you want to see your room? Claire stood. Sophie stayed close. Claire's room was at the end of the hall, set apart, with a connecting door to Adrian's room, but it also had a lock on Claire's side. The room was clean, warm, refined, but not decorated in an overtly feminine way, as if someone had tried to make it feel like a place an adult woman could breathe. The connecting door, Claire said, pointing, her voice tight. Can it be locked? Yes, Adrian answered immediately. However you want. I won't come in unless you invite me. Claire studied him. You can say that, but I don't know if you'll keep your word. Adrian met her gaze. I don't promise what I won't keep. It was infuriating in its confidence, but those eyes didn't feel fake. Night fell. The mansion went quiet, like a black blanket laid over everything. Sophie finally slept from sheer exhaustion. Nadia left after asking if Claire needed anything. Claire said no. She didn't want to be taken care of. She wanted control. She went back to Ella's room. Ella slept deeply, a moon-shaped nightlight casting a pale purple glow across the walls. In the tea party corner sat a tiny toy tea set, and on the table a stuffed bear waited like a guest. Picture books lined a shelf. Not the stiff, brand-new kind bought at random, but age-appropriate ones, including the little unicorn that Ella had once seen at a used bookstore and begged for, and Claire hadn't had the money to buy. Emotion rose up before caution could drag it back down. Claire stood still, fingertips brushing the spine of the book. He knew, and the fact that he knew sent a cold down her back. Claire returned to her room and tried to force herself to sleep, but in the middle of the night, she heard a voice through the connecting door. Adrian's. Low, clear, not the soft murmur of affection, the voice of command. She got up and moved quietly closer. The door was shut but not perfectly sealed. The sound slipped through in fragments. Find Ryan, Adrian said. Fast, but listen carefully. A pause. No one touches the child. His voice sharpened like a blade striking a table. No one touches an innocent family. I don't want to hear a single report that includes the words accidentally or we slipped. Understand? Another man's voice answered quietly. Understood. Claire froze. She had braced herself to hear him order arson, to hear take whatever you can. She had braced herself for cruelty wrapped in politeness. But no one touches the child. Left her stunned. This boss had principles, or were those principles something he only used when he wanted to look decent in front of her? Claire shuddered and stepped back, reminding herself, don't trust too fast. But her heart betrayed her with a different rhythm. The rhythm of someone who spent too long watching men promise and disappear, and now hears a man give orders that still draw a line. A little later, someone knocked softly on her door. Not the knock of a command, just two even taps like asking for permission. Claire held her breath. Who is it? Nadia, a woman's voice said. Claire opened the door a crack. Nadia stood there holding a small box and a new phone. Mr. Karpenko asked me to give this to you, Nadia said. A private phone. Only a few numbers. Claire took it and looked at the screen. On the lock screen, a small note was taped. Emergency. Nadia stepped back. He said, you should hear it directly from him. Right then, Adrian appeared at the far end of the hallway. No suit, just the white shirt, walking without sound. When he got closer, he stopped at a polite distance. He looked at the phone in her hand. That's yours, Adrian said. If you want to leave, call that number. It will take you. Claire gripped the phone so hard her knuckles whitened. Take me where? She asked hoarse. Anywhere you choose, Adrian replied. A hotel, Sophie's place, another city. You name the destination, my driver will take you. Claire stared at him, full of suspicion. And you'll really let me go? Adrian didn't dodge the question. He looked straight at her, his voice dropping lower, heavy and clear. I won't keep you with locks. I'll only keep it with you. Out there is dangerous. In here is safe. You get to choose. Cold spread through Claire, because choice offered by a man who could take it away at any moment, and yet he chose to offer it. Adrian tipped his head slightly like a closing note. Go to sleep, Claire, he said. You'll need to be clear-headed tomorrow. Then he turned and walked away. Claire stood in her doorway, the phone in her hand, like something heavy being placed on the fragile edge of her trust. She watched his shadow disappear down the long hall, and for the first time that night, she didn't know what frightened her more. Being locked in, or the possibility that the door was truly open. The second week arrived without Claire noticing at first, maybe because in this house, time didn't move by the clock the way it had in her old apartment. In a poor life, every day was a calculation. Ella's medicine, rent, gas, food. Here, everything ran so smoothly it felt suspicious, like a thick rug laid over the jagged teeth of life. That morning, Claire woke up to sunlight, not to Ella's coughing or a bank notification saying insufficient funds. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house. No yelling, no arguing, no neighbors pounding on the wall. Just birds outside the garden and tiny footsteps running down the hallway. Ella burst into Claire's room like a gust of wind. Mommy, there are bunny-shaped pancakes, she squealed. Claire sat up, her heart sinking by habit, checking if her daughter was wheezing, checking if an asthma attack had come back. But Ella was fine, healthy, rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed, clutching a paper napkin printed with stars. Sophie appeared in the doorway, yawning, her eyes still alert like a guard. She already ate breakfast. Nothing weird, except she's calling the boss Alex like they're super close. Claire shot her sister a look, but she couldn't fire back, because it was weird. Claire walked downstairs into the kitchen. The kitchen here was as big as a dream Claire had never dared to have. The smell of melted butter, chamomile tea, and toasted bread. The chef, Mrs. Reynolds, smiled warmly and set another plate of fruit on the table. Nadia stood nearby and asked Claire if she wanted coffee or tea. And Adrian was sitting at the far end of the table. Not the boss sits at the head while everyone stands kind of sitting. He sat like a man trying to learn how to have a family without turning it into a machine. His sleeves were rolled up. A white ceramic mug sat in front of him. He looked up as Claire entered, his gaze pausing for 1 second on her face, like a silent check. "Are you okay?" "Good morning," he said. Claire nodded, then pulled out a chair and sat beside Ella. She still wasn't used to it. It still felt like she was sitting inside a painting that didn't belong to her. Adrian didn't talk much. He let Ella talk nonstop about the pancakes, about the garden, about today I want to have another tea party, about the yellow butterflies she'd seen outside the window. Claire waited for him to give gifts, to buy them, but Adrian only listened. Occasionally he answered with a short sentence at the right moment, like someone learning a child's language through patience. After breakfast, Claire stood at the staircase, holding the old bag that had been with her for years. She took a deep breath. "I'm going to class." Sophie immediately stepped closer. "Are you sure? What if out there?" "I have to go," Claire said, her voice firm. "I've missed too many days." Adrian appeared behind them. He didn't jump into the argument. He only said what needed saying. "The car is waiting at the gate." He paused. "With a driver?" Claire turned. "I don't need a driver." "I know," Adrian replied, "but you're going, and you're coming back. And I want to be sure of that." "So you're sending someone to follow me," Claire said, her eyes narrowing. "Protection," Adrian corrected calmly. "Not surveillance." Claire gave a dry laugh. "Your words are always so pretty." Adrian didn't deny it. He only added, as if setting a boundary for himself. "The guard will keep a distance. He won't enter the campus. He won't talk to your classmates. He won't show himself to you unless there's danger." Claire hated the feeling, hated the invisible shadow always traveling with her. But when she stepped outside, saw the black car waiting, and remembered the last time she'd gone to class, when she'd had to leave in the middle because Ella had an asthma attack and she didn't have money for medicine, she felt that hatred weaken, not disappear, just weaken. She got into the car. In the rearview mirror, she saw another vehicle far behind, a silent black streak on the road. Protection, not surveillance. The phrase still bothered her. But today, for the first time in years, she sat up straight, looked at the doors of her school, and didn't have to think the familiar question. Where will the money come from tomorrow to buy my child's medicine? For the first time, Claire got to go to class. Just to learn. Nursing school didn't get easier just because her life had changed. The sharp scent of antiseptic was still harsh. Exams still made her head spin. A few classmates' curious stares still clung to her. Because she'd disappeared for so long and then returned, dressed cleaner, eyes still tired but carrying something that wasn't desperation anymore. Claire tried not to think about the mansion, not about the black cars, not about the man who could reset her life with a few phone calls. She buried herself in books, in heart and lung models, in questions about medication, emergency care, how to keep someone alive in the moment they think they're dying. Ironically, it was here, in a class about saving people, that Claire realized she had spent years living just to survive. When she got home, the afternoon was already fading. Hey. She stepped into the living room and stopped in the doorway. Ella was hosting a tea party. A tiny table, shiny plastic cups. A teddy bear was seated neatly like a VIP guest. And Adrian was sitting across from Ella, back straight, feet placed properly, holding a toy teacup between two fingers, like a gentleman in a palace. Ella stared at him seriously. "Alex, you have to drink it all. You're not allowed to refuse a guest." Adrian nodded, even more serious than a preschool teacher. "I understand." Then he lifted the cup to his lips and took a very proper sip of nothing. Claire, who was used to pressing her lips together to keep from crying and grinding her teeth to keep from collapsing, suddenly laughed. The sound escaped so unexpectedly that she slapped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. It rang out in this wide, cold house like a sunbeam landing in the wrong place, and that made it even more precious. Ella whipped around, eyes blazing. "Mommy laughed! Mommy, come drink tea with me!" Claire stepped in, her heart softening a little. Adrian looked up at her. In his eyes was something strange, as if he'd just seen a door open. Not a mansion door, but Claire's door. "You're back," he said, his voice low. Yeah, Claire replied, still tasting laughter in her throat. I, I'm back. That moment made the house feel less cold for real, not because of money, not because of power, just because a serious man was drinking pretend tea and a woman laughed for the first time without forcing it. That night after Ella fell asleep, Adrian called Claire into his office. There was no interrogation atmosphere, no sit down, just an envelope placed neatly on the desk, like a gift without wrapping paper. Adrian slid the envelope toward Claire. What is this? Claire asked. Transfer paperwork, Adrian said, tuition, and a scholarship. Claire opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly from tension. The documents were clear, legal, and stamped. The scholarship recipient's name was Claire Bennett. No Karpenko Foundation. No bragging stamp that said I'm funding you. No Mrs. Karpenko. Claire looked up, her eyes sharp. Why are you doing this? Adrian met her gaze. I don't want you to owe me. Claire clenched the papers. Then what do you want? Adrian leaned back in his chair, silent for a beat, as if he understood she would keep asking that until the answer was real enough. I want you to stand on your own, he said slowly, so that if one day you leave me, you'll still be standing. The words went through Claire like numbness, because it didn't sound like a man trying to keep her. It sounded like a man preparing for the possibility that she would go. You, Claire started, then stopped. She didn't know what to call this feeling, gratitude, fear, or both. She looked down at the envelope in her hands, at her name printed clearly, at a future opening like a door she had never believed she deserved. Then she looked up and asked the question she'd been trying to avoid for weeks, afraid the answer would ruin everything. So what do you really want from me? And Adrian looked at her, his eyes darkening slightly. Not dark like a threat, but dark like something real he had held back for far too long. Claire held the envelope like it could slice her skin. The smell of new paper, fresh ink, the smell of a future, all of it made it hard to breathe. Because since when could her life be neatly stacked into a file this clean? And since when did a man powerful enough to bend other people's fates say, I don't want you to owe me? Claire stared at Adrian for a long time. The warm yellow light in his office washed over the high bridge of his nose, the hard line of his jaw, eyes dark as a moonless night. But what made her shiver wasn't the coldness. It was the restraint, like a hunting animal that knows how to sit still. What do you want from me? Claire asked again, slower this time, sharper. Don't go in circles. Don't say peace. Don't say protection. What do you want? Really? Adrian didn't smile, didn't dodge, didn't use sweet words. He stood and came around the desk, but stopped at a distance that kept Claire from feeling cornered. A step Claire realized he'd trained into instinct, close enough to tell the truth, not close enough to press. I want a family, Adrian said. His voice was low and even, like setting a stone on the ground. A home with the sound of a child in it, a woman who doesn't shake in fear when she hears a car stop outside the gate. Claire let out a short, bitter laugh. You picked wrong. I shake because of you. Adrian nodded, accepting it outright. I know. And you still did it. Claire's voice rose. You showed up at the church like some savior. You put a ring on my finger. You brought me into your house. You dash. And I signed a clause that lets you leave. Adrian cut in, not harshly, just stating a fact. I gave you a phone to call a car to take you away. I left the doors unlocked. You call that freedom? Claire tightened her grip on the envelope. The paper crackled. Freedom inside a frame you built ahead of time? Adrian's eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't react like a man who'd been insulted. He reacted like a man who understood she was hurting. In my world, he said slowly, love is a weakness people snap in half. You love someone. You get blackmailed through that person. I've seen too much. Claire looked at him, her chest heavy like something was pressing down. So you chose an arrangement? Yes, Adrian said. A clean arrangement to start with. No dreamy promises. No fantasies. No buying it with coercion. Claire scoffed. No coercion? What do you call the church? For the first time, Adrian stayed silent longer than a beat. That silence wasn't calculation. It felt like swallowing his pride. That was coercion, he said at last. I won't deny it. Claire froze. She'd been ready to hear excuses, to hear I had no choice, to hear him blame Ryan, blame circumstances, blame the world. But Adrian took it head on. No denial, no cover. Then why? Claire asked, her voice rough. If you knew it was wrong, why did you still do it? Adrian looked straight at her, and in that moment Claire realized he was choosing something harder than power, choosing honesty. Because I wanted you alive, he said, and because I wanted you in my life. The words landed like a hot touch in the center of Claire's chest. Not romantic, not flowery, but enough to make her furious and unsettled. She slapped the envelope down on the desk. And the way you tracked me, Claire snapped, like an arrow that had been lodged in her throat for too long. Just say it. You knew Ella liked purple. You knew I drink chamomile tea when I'm anxious. You knew I'm in nursing school. You knew. Wrong, Adrian said immediately, decisive. You're right. It was wrong. Claire shot to her feet. Tracking me was wrong. Yes, Adrian nodded. No dodging. But I didn't touch your life. I didn't make you lose your job. I didn't arrange for Ryan to get close to you. I didn't control you. You still watched, Claire's voice grated. You took pieces of my life like they were items you could collect. Adrian didn't soften to beg. His gaze only went deeper, like a man placing his hand on his own fracture. I watched to know what you needed, he said, and to know you were a good person. Claire went rigid. A good person? You could have chosen the easy way, Adrian said, his voice low. You could have found a man to lean on. You could have used pity. You could have so many things. But you chose 2 jobs. You chose night classes. You chose to keep Ella with your own strength. He paused, weighing each word so it wouldn't turn into flirting. I respect that, Adrian said. I want someone like that. Claire listened, and something inside her felt strange, like being seen through, like someone touching a place no one touched. Only it was done with eyes. She stepped forward closer, directly facing him, not to be pressed, but to place herself in the heat on her own terms. Listen, Claire said, low but sharp as a blade. I'm not something you want the way you want a rare object. I'm a mother. I have a child. I have boundaries. If you do anything that makes me feel like my life is being controlled, I will leave. Adrian held her gaze without blinking. Then he nodded slowly. Reset the boundaries, he said. I'm listening. Claire exhaled hard. You agree? I agree, Adrian said. Then he added, his voice like a declaration that didn't need witnesses. I want you to respect me because I deserve it, not because I'm frightening. That stopped Claire in place. A crime boss, a man who could silence an entire church, was saying he didn't want respect built on fear. Claire didn't know how to respond to a man like that. A man who did wrong and admitted it. Dangerous yet disciplined. Possessive yet trying. To learn how not to suffocate with that possession. The air between them heated up. Not the heat of a fight, the heat of 2 people standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong step and they fall. And they were trying not to fall. Claire turned away, walking a few steps just to get air back into her lungs. And right then, Nadia's voice called from the hallway, more urgent than usual. Miss Claire, Claire spun around. What? Nadia looked pale. Ella, she's hot. She has a fever. Claire's heart dropped straight into her stomach. She bolted into the hallway like she'd been yanked. Her whole body flipped into survival mode. Check the forehead, check the lips, check the breathing. Ella lay curled under the purple blanket, face flushed, eyes wet, lips trembling. Mom, Ella whimpered. Claire wanted to cry, to scream, to slam doors. In her life, a fever was always the start of long nights. The hospital, the bills, the medicine, the fear of what if it gets worse. Adrian appeared behind her. No orders, no wasted questions. He set a box of medicine, a thermometer, and a bottle of water on the bedside table. I called a doctor, he said. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Claire whirled, about to explode. Don't you? I'm not touching her, Adrian cut in, voice low and steady. You do. I'll stand here. Claire faltered. True, he didn't step closer. He held the distance, like he remembered every rule he'd set. The doctor arrived, examined Ella, and said it was just a viral fever. Reduce the fever, monitor her, and keep her hydrated. Claire still trembled with the memory of poverty, because every time her child got sick, her life felt like a rope pulled tight. When the doctor left, Claire sat beside the bed, wiping sweat from Ella's forehead, whispering, soothing, counting breaths like counting life. She heard footsteps behind her. Adrian stood at the doorway, not entering. Not because he was afraid, because he was waiting. He looked at Claire, asking one question with his eyes. May I? Claire swallowed hard. She didn't want to let him step into the most intimate part of her world, but she was also exhausted, and Ella was whispering, thirsty. Claire gave a small nod, just a small nod. Adrian entered like a man walking into a church, light, quiet, touching nothing that wasn't his. He picked up the glass of water, handed it to Claire, then knelt on the opposite side of the bed, keeping distance. Ella's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and found him. Alex, she murmured. Adrian answered, his voice deep but gentle. Yeah, I'm here. Ella winced. I'm hot. I know, Adrian said, but you'll be okay. Claire watched that and felt her heart tighten, because Adrian didn't overdo it. He didn't perform being a hero. He simply showed up at the right time, in the right place, like a quiet wall. A little later, Ella fell asleep again, breathing more evenly. Claire stood to grab a cold cloth. When she turned back, she saw Adrian had lifted Ella, carefully like she was something so precious that even holding her too firmly would be a sin. Ella's head rested on his shoulder, her small hand gripping the collar of his white shirt. Adrian's face in that moment was different. No longer the face of a boss giving orders, no longer the coldness of a man who controlled the world, just a man looking at a child as if he wanted to protect him with his whole life. And that softening was the most dangerous thing of all. Dangerous to Claire's heart. She stood in the doorway, still holding the cloth, eyes burning without understanding why. Because there are moments that make you forget you're supposed to stay guarded. And Claire had just seen one. The second month arrived as if by habit, not crashing in like a storm, not blazing like an escape. It came in tiny things, things Claire had never dared to believe she could have. Dinner at a normal hour, Ella's homework not left unfinished because her mother had to rush to a shift, sleep that wasn't jolted awake by debt collectors calling. Family didn't form through vows, it formed through rhythm. At night, the three of them ate together. Ella told stories from school. Now she had a tutor, reading assignments, naive questions falling like rain. Adrian listened as if it were the most important briefing of his life. Some nights Ella made him do a princess voice while reading a story, and Claire had to turn her face away so she wouldn't laugh, because a boss doing a princess voice was genuinely an unbelievable image. Claire began to realize Adrian didn't love with grand displays. He loved by showing up at the right time. Not this is a gift, but this is what she needs. Not I'll handle everything, but keep studying. And somewhere in the quiet spaces, those things settled inside Claire, like salt dissolving in water. You couldn't see it, but it changed the taste. She started remembering things about him, not because she tried, because her brain recorded them on its own. Adrian hated noise when he was thinking. When he handled work, if someone spoke too loudly, he didn't yell. He simply went quiet. But that silence was enough to make an entire room lower its voice. And Adrian remembered how Claire took her coffee. No sugar. Add milk. And if Claire was tired, she would grip the cup tightly, as if the heat inside it were the only thing keeping her together. One morning, Claire came down to the kitchen and saw a cup of coffee already waiting, exactly that way. No one said, I made it. No one took credit. There was only the coffee and a small note. It's cold today. Wear something warm. Adrian's handwriting was sharp and neat, like an order. But the sentence itself was like a hand blocking the wind. Sophie saw it and shot Claire a look that said, Don't soften. Claire glared back, but she couldn't deny that somewhere inside her, something was easing. Then came the hospital fundraiser. Claire got an email from school. The hospital was hosting a fundraising night for a pediatric treatment support fund, and Claire's class had been assigned to help. She was both excited and afraid, because it was a place full of people with status: doctors, donors, administrators, people who spoke in the language of confidence. She had been in places like that once, the day she met Ryan. She had thought she'd finally made it, and then she'd been left behind like a joke. When Claire told Adrian, he didn't ask, "Do you need me to go with you?" like a favor. He only said one sentence as if it were an obvious truth. "You're going with me." Claire frowned. "I'm going because of class, not because of you." Adrian nodded. "Exactly. But that night, you'll be seen as my wife. I'm not letting you stand alone." Claire wanted to argue, but "I'm not letting you stand alone" hid a fear she kept well hidden. The fear of being judged, being looked down on, being seen as a woman who was picked up rather than a woman with worth. That night, Claire wore a simple dark blue dress, not too expensive, not too showy. She wanted to look like Claire, not Mrs. Karpenko. Adrian appeared in a black suit, collar neat, hair combed back. He looked at her for a beat, then said exactly one word: "Beautiful. Not beautiful because I chose it. Not beautiful because you're mine. Just beautiful, like acknowledgement." In the car, Claire was quiet. Her hands were cold. Adrian looked at the hand tightening around her small clutch. He didn't touch her. He only lowered his voice. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to smile. You just have to look at me. I'll handle it." Claire snapped, "I don't need you to handle anything." Adrian nodded, as if he'd expected it. "Yeah, but I'll still be there." The hospital that night was brightly lit. The grand lobby was full of laughter, glasses clinking, sparkling dresses, and handshakes that smelled like power. Claire stepped in and felt like she was back in the church that day. Except here, people didn't whisper openly. They looked with their eyes, with polite smiles, with the quick sweep of assessment. She could feel the unspoken questions. Who is she? His wife? A lucky girl? Adrian didn't pull her against him to mark her. He walked beside her, close enough that she wouldn't get lost, far enough that she wouldn't become an accessory. When people greeted Adrian, he didn't introduce Claire as my wife first. He said, "Claire, she's studying nursing. She works directly with pediatric cases. She's here because this fund matters to her." Claire froze, not because of the introduction, but because he put her work ahead of her title. During the fundraiser, a department head asked Claire why she had chosen the field. Claire answered with the truth, no polish. "Because I was once a mother who didn't have money to buy medicine. I don't want anyone to feel that." The room paused for a beat. Then the people nearby went quiet. Not quite out of pity, quiet because they heard something real. Claire didn't know if she had just shone or just exposed a wound. But Adrian stood behind her, didn't cut in, only let her speak. And when she finished, he gave the smallest nod as if saying, "You did well." A man in a tuxedo, half drunk and half arrogant, laughed. "Oh, so your wife is the lucky Cinderella type, huh? Meet the right guy and your whole life changes." Claire felt her cheeks burn. Part of her wanted to disappear. Another part wanted to slap him. Adrian turned to the man, his expression calm in a way that was terrifying. But his voice didn't rise. "No," Adrian said. "She's good, and she did it herself." That was all. No intimidation, no show of power, no mention of organizations, no mention of money. Just one sentence placing Claire exactly where she deserved to stand. Claire turned away quickly because her eyes went red without warning. She was used to men protecting her by making her smaller. "Stay behind me, I'll handle it." But Adrian protected her by putting her where she belonged. She did it herself. And that sentence made Claire's heart vibrate like a string that had just been plucked. On the way home, Claire sat silent as if holding something tight in her chest so it wouldn't break. The car moved through dark roads. City lights slid across the windows like long streaks of stars. When the car stopped at the mansion gate, Claire got out first. Cold wind hit her face, but the heat inside her chest remained. Adrian followed. He was about to ask, "Are you okay?" Like always. But Claire didn't give him the chance. She turned, stepped forward, and hugged him, quick, clumsy, like a touch that wanted to run away. It wasn't a lover's embrace. It was a reflex. Thank you without wanting to say it. Adrian's body went rigid for a thousandth of a second, not from discomfort, but because he was restraining the instinct to respond. He didn't squeeze. He didn't pull her back. He didn't take advantage. He just stood still and asked softly right by her ear, his voice deep like it brushed the edge of her skin, "Are you okay?" That question broke Claire's defenses because it said he didn't treat the hug as a right. He treated it as a choice, and he was still asking permission, even though she was his legal wife on paper. Claire let go, breathing hard. She looked up. The porch light lay a strange warmth over Adrian's eyes. He stood there, waiting, not moving closer. Claire felt her heart rush into dangerous territory, the territory of what she didn't want to admit, that she was starting to want to be close to him, not because of money, not because of safety, but because he respected her so much that she felt like she was a person again. Claire rose onto her toes as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her lips came so close to his that she could feel his breath, warm and restrained. And right then, fear surfaced. Fear that if she kissed him, she would owe him. Fear that if she kissed him, she would belong to him. Fear that if she kissed him, everything would never go back to the way it was. Claire stopped, stepped back, her eyes wide with the panic of someone who had just stood too close to the edge. Adrian didn't move. No smile, no anger, no, "Is that it?" He only looked at her and said one sentence, light as wind, but heavy with promise. "Whenever you're ready." Claire stood under the porch light, chest rising and falling, her skin still remembering the feel of her arms around him. And she understood. The most dangerous thing about this man wasn't his power. It was that he never forced a kiss, yet somehow made her want to give one willingly. Ryan came back on a day that felt almost ordinary. No gunshots, no black cars are parked outside the gate, no strange texts at midnight. Just an unknown number calling right after Claire got out of class. When she was standing under the school awning, arms full of clinical practice paperwork, her mind still carrying the lingering heat of when you're ready like a fresh burn. It rang 3 times. Claire almost declined, but something in her instincts made her answer. "Claire!" That voice, like an old smell rising from the bottom of memory. Not the smell of love, the smell of a wrong she once forgave herself for. Claire went still. "Ryan." "Heard you're doing well," Ryan said with a soft laugh. Except there was no joy in it. It had teeth. "Nice house, rich husband. That little girl must be treated like a princess." Cold crawled up Claire's spine. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter." Ryan's tone slid smoothly. "What matters is you still remember who I owe. And I also remember you're holding something I can use." Claire tightened her grip on the phone. "Don't mention Ella." "Oh, come on, why so tense?" Ryan exhaled like he was smiling. "I'm just talking. Adults talking to each other." Claire swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "I want you to tell Adrian," Ryan said casually, like he was asking a favor. "Tell him to stop. Tell him to give me a way out. Or you give me a little money. Not much. Just enough for me to disappear." Claire heard her heartbeat pounding in her ears, each thud hitting bone. "No," she said without thinking. Ryan went quiet for a beat. Then his voice dropped lower. "So you think Ella's safe?" he asked. "Claire, do you know where she goes to school? Do you know what time you're picking her up? Do you know she likes to stop at that pink candy machine on the corner?" The blood in Claire's body turned to ice. He knew. The worst part wasn't the threat. It was the detail. "You followed my child," Claire burst out, her voice cracking. "I just care," Ryan said, innocent in a way that was sick. "Because she's the best leverage to make you behave." Claire wanted to throw up. Her hand shook so hard the phone nearly slipped. "Listen," Ryan continued, velvet soft and needle poisoned. "You speak for me. You tell Adrian to let it go. Otherwise, you know, she's little. She scares easily. One good cry and you'll melt." Claire bit her lip until she tasted blood. Don't call me again, she said, hoarse but steady. I'll call the police. Ryan scoffed. The police? You think the police can save you from your husband's world? Then he hung up. Claire stood frozen under the awning. Sunlight, people passing, everything normal. But inside her, something had just cracked. She didn't go home right away. She sat in her car, breathing hard, staring at the street like it was a painting that could suddenly catch fire. Ella, her baby. Claire took out the second phone, the one Adrian had given her. Her fingers shook, but this time she didn't hide. She called Adrian. He picked up almost immediately. Claire? Just hearing her name made her want to cry, but she swallowed it down. Ryan called me, Claire said. He brought up Ella. He knows her schedule. No swearing, no slammed desk. Only a brief silence, very brief, like a metal door sealing shut somewhere. Where are you? Adrian asked. At school. Stay where you are. His voice was low, calm to the point of cold. A car is coming, not to take you away, to cover you. Claire shivered. Adrian, I don't want violence. I don't want blood. I hear you. No. Claire gripped the phone tightly. Do you hear me clearly? I want you to promise. Don't kill him. Don't let Ella see violence. Don't turn me into a mother who lives with blood on her hands. A beat of silence. Then Adrian said, each word distinct. I promise. No blood in front of the child, and no killing unless it's unavoidable. Unless it's unavoidable, stung, but Claire understood, within his world, that was the realest boundary he could offer. 10 minutes later, a car arrived. A guard stood at a distance, exactly as Adrian said, but their eyes swept the area constantly. War mode switched on, still trying to stay quiet. Claire was taken home. The mansion gates shut. Everything remained expensive and spotless, but the air felt weird. Adrian met her in his office. No suit, just a shirt with the cuffs undone. He looked her over from head to toe like he was checking whether someone had put hands on her. When he saw she was untouched, his eyes went darker. Not softer, just shifting into something else. What did he say? Adrian asked. Claire told him, forcing her voice to stay steady. Sophie stood nearby, face pale, gripping her phone like she was about to call the police herself. And when Claire repeated the part about the pink candy machine, Sophie swore out loud. Claire couldn't. She just felt skinned. Every one of Ella's little habits turned into a map for someone evil. Adrian listened without interrupting or showing much expression, but when Claire finished, he stood up, very slowly. What do you want? He asked Claire. Claire blinked. What? Do you want me to handle this my way, Adrian said, or in a way you can live with? Claire stared at him. In that moment, she saw it clearly. He was handing her the decision. The way I can live with, Claire said instantly. I don't want Ella to know. I don't want this house to become a place my child is afraid of. Adrian nodded. Okay. Adrian handled it ruthlessly and cleanly. No guns, no kidnapping, no basement torture like the stories people whispered about men like him. He called his lawyer. He opened his laptop. He picked up the phone and spoke to someone in a language Claire didn't understand. But his tone stamped each word into place. Efficient, precise, no extras. 2 days later, Claire learned what ruthless really meant. Ryan's accounts were frozen. The money he'd hidden was traced through transaction chains, like a fish that thought it was swimming in darkness, never realizing there was a net under the water. A restraining order was filed. A legal warning was sent to the people who had helped Ryan hide. No one was beaten. No one's teeth were broken. But Ryan's entire system was choked so tightly he had to surface just to breathe. And Adrian didn't touch the innocent. Claire saw that clearly. When Sophie demanded in fury, "Why not teach him a lesson?" Adrian only said, "Because Claire asked me not to, and because Ella doesn't need to see evil to understand it exists." That shut Claire up, but it didn't calm her. It made her more afraid, because Claire began to see Adrian's real world, a world where law was a tool, finances a noose, and information a scalpel, a world that didn't need blood to ruin a life. One evening, Claire stood in the garden, looking at the lights in the trees, listening to the fountain. Ella was asleep. Everything was quiet. But inside Claire, nothing was. Adrian stepped out and stopped beside her, not touching her. Claire spoke, her voice small, like a confession. I'm raising my child in this world. Adrian looked at her for a long time. He didn't deny it. He didn't say my world is good. He only spoke the truth, like a man who didn't know how to sugarcoat. This world is dangerous, he said, but it also has ways to protect. Claire turned to him, eyes red. I don't want Ella growing up thinking protection means bodyguards, tracking, someone getting choked out because of one phone call. Adrian didn't argue. He drew a deep breath, then said something that made Claire go still because she didn't expect him to say it. If you want to leave, Adrian said, you can. Claire froze. Adrian held her gaze, his voice low, steady, like a vow that didn't need a church to witness it. But Ryan will never be able to touch you two again. The hook at the end of the chapter was right there, in a sentence that sounded like freedom and warning at the same time. And Claire realized her real choice was no longer a simple stay or go. It was whether she dared to believe that a man who started with an arrangement was now opening the door for her with freedom and still putting her safety above his own ego. There are cages made of gold, and there are cages made of kindness. Claire had thought if she were going to be kept, it would come with locks, with cameras, with words like, you're not allowed to go anywhere. But for the past 2 months, what had held her wasn't something she could fight. It was the hardest thing to resist. A quiet house, a child who could sleep through the night, and a man who always asked, are you okay? Before touching anything that belonged to her. That night, after Adrian's words in the garden, if you want to leave, you can, Claire barely slept. She lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside the window. Every time she closed her eyes, 2 images pressed over each other. Ella laughing in the purple room, and Ryan talking about the pink candy machine. Freedom, love. Sometimes those 2 things stand on opposite sides like 2 riverbanks. And Claire, who had spent her whole life swimming in cold water, suddenly found herself afraid of the shore she used to dream about. The next morning, Nadia told Claire that Adrian wanted to see her in his office. There's a lawyer. Claire's heart jumped. She immediately imagined another set of papers, papers that would turn her into someone with no way out. Binding clauses, cold lines, traps written in legal language. She walked in with her body strung tight like a violin string. Adrian stood by the window in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up. On the desk sat a thick file, a signing pen, and an older man, Attorney Harrington, sitting upright, his glasses set neatly as if his life consisted only of rules. Adrian turned. His eyes weren't cold. They didn't dodge. They were just serious. Sit down, he said. Claire didn't sit immediately. What are you planning to do? Adrian didn't react to her sharpness. He only pulled out a chair for her, then sat across from her, not behind the desk like a boss. This is a key, Adrian said. Claire frowned. Harrington slid the file toward her. Mrs. Karpenko. Claire cut in, her voice hard. Call me Claire. Harrington paused, then nodded. Claire, these are updated documents outlining your benefits and a safe exit option if you choose. Claire stared at Adrian like she couldn't believe him. An exit option? Adrian nodded. Yes. Claire opened the file. Each page felt like a slap to the old picture in her head. A bank account in Claire's name, with access granted only to Claire. An education fund, also in Claire's name, not tied to Adrian, not forcing her to owe him. Written confirmation of her right to continue school, the right to choose her internship placement, and the right to work after graduation. A custody agreement, clear language protecting Claire as the primary guardian. And finally, an exit plan, a safe location, a route, a car, support personnel, an emergency contact list, and one single condition. If Claire chose to leave, Adrian would ensure Ryan and everyone connected to him could never touch her and her daughter again. Claire read, her hands turning cold. She looked up. This is real? Adrian met her gaze, his eyes deep and dark. It's real. Why? Claire asked, her voice nearly breaking. Why would you do this? Adrian went silent for a beat, as if the answer wasn't something he wanted to say, but something he had to say if he wanted her to believe him. Because I want you to stay, Adrian said, but I want you to choose. The words dropped into the office like an echo. Claire went rigid. In her world, when men wanted to keep someone, they usually used three things: money, promises, or fear. Adrian was doing the opposite. He was placing freedom on the table like a gift he knew could send her away. Claire shook her head. You're Mafia. Adrian looked at her the way you look at a child asking about a storm. Yes. Mafia doesn't hand out keys, Claire said. They lock doors. Adrian exhaled. I've lived my whole life with locks. I don't want you living that way. Claire let out a strangled laugh. You talk like you're a good man. Adrian didn't claim he was good. He only said something Claire couldn't argue with. I'm a man who knows exactly where I was wrong. Harrington stood and excused himself, leaving the room to the two of them. When the door shut, the air softened, but it also became more exposed. Claire set the file down and looked at Adrian. If I leave, you'll really let me go? Adrian held her gaze without blinking. Yeah, Claire swallowed. And if I stay? Adrian didn't answer right away. He rose and stepped closer, close enough for Claire to feel his warmth, but still keeping the distance he always respected. If you stay, Adrian said, his voice low, I'll know it's because you want to, not because you're scared, not because you owe me. Claire's heart hammered like she'd been running. Real freedom was right here. But freedom was terrifying too, because if she chose to stay after being handed a key, she couldn't lie to herself and call it circumstance. She would have to name it love, or at least something growing into love. That afternoon, Claire went back to her room, her head still spinning. She passed Ella's common room and stopped. Ella was sitting on the floor, colored pencils scattered everywhere, lips pressed tight with concentration. She was making a card. What are you doing? Claire asked. Ella looked up, eyes bright. A card for our family. Claire froze. Our family? Yes. Ella nodded. My teacher said to draw your family. I drew Mommy, me, and Alex. Then Ella held the card up like a treasure. On the paper were 3 stick figures drawn in messy lines. One with long hair, Claire, one small, Ella, and one very tall figure colored in black, with a serious face but a little, small smile. Red hearts floated overhead, and a scribbled word, family. Claire's throat tightened. Had her life ever had family, or had it only ever been the two of us in constant survival? Mommy, why are you crying? Ella asked, confused. Claire lifted a hand to her face and realized tears had already fallen. She knelt and hugged her. It's okay. Mommy is just happy. Ella hugged back, then whispered like a secret. Alex is good. Alex doesn't make Mommy cry. The sentence drove straight into Claire's heart, because Adrian had promised that exact thing, and so far he'd kept it, not with words, but with every action. Claire let Ella go, wiped her tears, and stepped into the hallway. She wanted air, wanted to escape the feeling of being soft. But the moment she stepped out, Adrian was already there. Like he always knew when she needed a quiet moment. He didn't ask what was wrong in front of Ella. He only looked at the card in her hand, then looked into her eyes. Claire couldn't speak. Her throat locked. Adrian didn't hug her. He didn't rush. He simply pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it. So ordinary it didn't make her feel pitied. Claire took it and wiped her eyes. A beat of silence. She heard her own heartbeat. You don't have to answer right away, Adrian said softly. That key will always be there. Claire looked at him. Aren't you afraid I'll really leave? Adrian smiled very faintly like a crack in ice. I am. Claire stilled. But if I keep you with fear, Adrian continued, then even if you stay, you won't belong to me. I want you to belong to yourself first. That made Claire feel like she might fold in half, not because it was pretty, because it was true. Night fell. The house was quiet. Ella slept in the purple room. Sophie had gone to her room too, and Claire stood in front of the connecting door between her room and Adrian's. That door had always been there, like a symbol. For 2 months, Claire had walked past it the way you walk past a final boundary. She hadn't crossed it, not because she was afraid of Adrian, but because she was afraid of herself, afraid that one step across would change the shape of everything. But today, after the card, after the file labeled freedom, after the sentence I want you to choose, Claire realized she couldn't keep standing forever in the hallway of hesitation. Claire put her hand on the doorknob. The cold metal against her skin pulled her back into reality. She opened the door, not forcefully, not dramatically, just enough for the hinge to make a soft sound, like a confession. On the other side, Adrian's room was darker, deeper. Adrian was sitting in a chair near the window, shirt open at the collar, a book on his lap. He looked up at the sound. His expression turned alert immediately. Not alert with suspicion, but the alertness of someone afraid of making her uncomfortable. Claire stood in the doorway, heart pounding like a drum. She stepped in once, not out of duty, not because of paperwork, but because she wanted to say one sentence that, if she didn't say it, would keep her living in half-dark forever. The door between the two rooms opened with the softest sound, so soft that if Claire hadn't been stretched tight as a guitar string, she might have thought she imagined it, but it still echoed in her chest like a confession. Adrian looked up from the chair by the window. The dim light painted half his face in shadows, calm, controlled lines. He didn't spring to his feet. He didn't step toward her. He didn't do anything that might make Claire feel she'd just handed over control. He only looked at her the way you look at someone standing at the edge of the biggest decision of their life. "Ella's asleep," Claire said, her voice rough from spending all day biting down on every emotion. She stayed in the doorway for another beat, her hands still wrapped around the doorknob like it was her last exit. "I'm not coming in here out of obligation." Adrian nodded, slow and solid. "I know." Claire took one more step. The carpet was soft under her feet. His room smelled like wood and paper, a faint trace of his familiar cologne. But what made her shake wasn't the scent. It was the distance he kept. A powerful man who could take anything, choosing to sit still so she could come to him on her own. Claire set the freedom folder on the table by the door, like placing down a key that had kept her awake and unsteady all night. "You prepared an escape route for me," she said. "You told me I could leave." "Yes," Adrian answered. "If that's what you need." Claire stared straight at him, and her eyes no longer held pure fear, only the raw truth of a woman who'd lived too long in survival mode. "Do you know how much that scares me?" Adrian tilted his head slightly, a tiny gesture, like he was opening himself to hear it all. "What scares you?" "That if I stay," Claire said, each word like she was pulling it from her chest, "then this time, I won't have any excuse left to lie to myself." Adrian fell silent, not to avoid her, silent like a man standing in front of something precious, afraid that one hard breath might break it. Claire inhaled deeply. She stepped closer, close enough to see his eyes clearly beneath the lamp. "I'm staying," she said. "I'm choosing to be with you." For a brief moment, Claire saw Adrian's shoulders tighten, a reflex, the instinct to hold on. But he restrained it immediately, the way he always did, like a reminder to himself. Claire continued, her voice steadier, her boundary as clear as a line drawn on paper. "But I don't belong to you. I belong to myself." Adrian looked at her for a long time. And then, as if he'd waited his whole life to hear a sentence like that, he stood, unhurried, not pressing, only standing to meet her at eye level so his words wouldn't fall from above. "And that," Adrian said, his voice low, unadorned, "is why I love you." The word love dropped into the air like an oath. Not cheesy, not a fairy tale promise. It sounded like something measured in blood and discipline, spoken once and never taken back. Claire didn't know how to respond to a man saying love for the first time without demanding anything in return. Her eyes burned. "Don't say that if you aren't sure." Adrian didn't hesitate. "I'm very sure." Claire swallowed hard. For months, their contract had saved her. It had been a shield, something that let her breathe without fear of being swallowed whole. But now, if she'd stepped through this door on her own, she knew they couldn't keep calling it a contract. Not with the slow fire burning inside her. Then we start over, Claire said. Not a contract, a commitment. Adrian nodded. Tell me your conditions. Claire held his gaze, not looking away. Respect the boundaries, still. Ask before touching the important things, still. Let me study. Let me work. Let me raise my child the way I believe. And if there's a day I panic, you can't use power to force me to stay through fear. Adrian answered immediately, like stamping a seal onto it. I agree. Claire drew a breath, then said the last thing, the one that made her heart pound hard enough to hurt. And I want us to go very slowly, but no pretending. If we choose each other, it has to be real. Adrian's eyes darkened, not with possession, but something deeper he'd always tried to keep contained, the hunger to be chosen freely. Okay, he said, his voice rougher. Slow, but real. Claire didn't know when she'd moved closer. She only knew the distance between them suddenly felt thin as fog. She lifted her chin, and this time, for the first time, she didn't wait for him to ask with his eyes. She raised her hand and touched the collar of his shirt, feeling his heartbeat under the fabric. Adrian didn't pull her in right away. He kept the habit Claire both loved and ached over. He asked softly, as if afraid of snapping something fragile. Is this okay? Claire nodded. This time, she didn't tremble. She didn't retreat. She nodded like a woman signing her name to her own choice. The kiss that reached them wasn't a polite promise in a church. It was longer, warmer, full of breath and heartbeat and an admission they couldn't take back. Claire was the one who moved first, but Adrian kept the rhythm, like he always did with everything. Enough for her to feel safe, enough for her not to feel led. When their mouths parted, Claire could still hear Adrian breathing. He rested his forehead against hers for a beat, as if he needed to confirm she was still here. Still Claire. Still the woman who belonged to no one but herself. That night, they were no longer two rooms connected by a door left slightly open. They were two people who had chosen each other with clear eyes. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, out of trust. And when things went further, they were guided by small questions and unmistakable nods. Enough for Claire to understand. This man's love always began with respect. The next morning, the house was still quiet, as it always was. Ella still woke up asking for pancakes. Sunlight still spilled across the kitchen floor like honey. But inside Claire, the world had shifted on its axis. She came downstairs with Adrian, hair slightly messy, heart still soft. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a guest in his life. Ella ran over and hugged Claire's legs, then looked up at Adrian with bright eyes. Alex, did you read a story last night? Adrian paused, a rare flicker of awkwardness in a man like him. Then he bent down, his voice solemn, like he was promising a business deal. Tonight I'll read. I owe you. Ella giggled as if it were the best thing in the world. Claire watched it and felt her throat tighten again. That night, they kept the promise. Ella lay between them, blanket pulled up to her chin, eyes wide like marbles. Claire held the book, but Adrian was the one who read, switching voices in a clumsy way that was strangely adorable. At one point, he made the wolf's voice too serious. Ella burst out laughing, and Claire laughed too. Laughed until she leaned her head back against the headboard like she might melt. When Ella fell asleep, Claire tucked the blanket around her and went into the kitchen. Adrian followed, not following exactly, but because now they had a quiet kind of togetherness. The kitchen was bright. Dirty dishes sat in the sink. Claire moved to wash them, but Adrian had already rolled up his sleeves. He stepped into place, turned on the water, and picked up the sponge as if it were a weapon he needed to learn to use. Claire leaned against the counter, watching him like he wasn't real. A crime boss does dishes? Adrian glanced over, the faintest tilt at the corner of his mouth. I'm learning how to be a husband. Claire let out a small laugh, small but warm, spreading through the kitchen like steam. She stepped beside him and handed him another plate, a moment so ordinary that if anyone saw it, they wouldn't see what they'd survived. Church, Ryan, threats, contracts. They'd only see a man washing dishes and a woman beside him, resting her forehead on his shoulder like a habit she'd only just learned. Adrian stilled, then leaned his head lightly into her hair, a touch so small it felt like a question without words. Claire gave a quiet yeah in her throat. And then, when everything was calm, Adrian turned off the water, dried his hands, and faced Claire with a seriousness that was unfamiliar. Not the seriousness of a boss, the seriousness of a man about to ask for something that mattered. "Tomorrow," Adrian said, "I want to do something." Claire looked up. "What?" Adrian didn't answer right away. He walked toward the hallway leading to Ella's room. Claire followed, her heart suddenly beating faster, because she could see it in his steps, a decision he'd been weighing for a long time. They entered the purple room. Ella was sitting up in bed, yawning and hugging her stuffed unicorn. "Mommy?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Claire said softly. "Alex just wants to say something." Adrian moved closer, but instead of looking at Claire first, he knelt in front of Ella. The gesture stopped Claire cold. A crime boss, the man who had walked into a church like darkness, now kneeling before a child, eyes serious but warm, voice low and soft as a pillow. "Ella," Adrian said, "I want to ask permission." Ella blinked. "Permission for what?" Adrian looked straight at her like she mattered as much as any adult in the room. "Permission to become family." Ella looked at Claire, then back at Adrian, thinking with exaggerated seriousness, and Claire understood immediately. This wasn't a flashy proposal. This was the deepest kind of asking. Asking the one thing Claire protected most. Ella asked, innocent and sharp as a needle, "Will you make Mommy cry?" Adrian answered without blinking, "No." "Will you listen to Mommy?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." "Will you stay?" Ella asked next, her voice going smaller, like she'd touched a fear she didn't have a name for. Adrian took a deep breath, then said slowly, "I'll stay, but I'll also respect it if one day Mommy needs to choose. Family is choosing each other every day." Ella was quiet for a beat, then lifted her hand and touched Adrian's cheek, very gently, like a seal. "Okay, then yes." Claire stood behind them, tears spilling before she could hide them. Adrian didn't turn around right away. He simply bowed his head to Ella as a thank you. Then finally he stood and looked at Claire, his gaze so deep she could feel the proposal he hadn't spoken yet living inside it. And Claire knew, if he had knelt for Ella first, then the day he knelt for her, it wouldn't be to keep her. It would be to ask her to make a proper choice. 1 year later, Claire stood in front of the mirror in the hospital locker room, fastening her name badge to the chest of her scrubs like she was fastening something back into place in her life. Claire Karpenko, RN. Adrian's last name sat there, not like a stamp of power, but like a choice she'd walked to on her own 2 feet. She studied herself in the mirror, hair pulled back neatly, eyes clear, shoulders no longer hunched from worrying about prescription money or the electric bill. She hadn't become the crime boss's wife to be rescued. She had become a woman with a career, a voice, a life, and a love mature enough not to require her to disappear. On graduation day, Claire finished at the top. She stood on stage, accepted her diploma to applause. Sophie sat below, crying before Claire did. Jade, now the kind of best friend who roasts you to keep you warm, leaned over and whispered, "See? You married a crime boss, and you're still the one making the rules in that house." Claire laughed, eyes stinging. Because it was true. From that day on in the big house, no one gave Claire orders. No one dared touch Ella without her nod. Ella's schedule was still Claire's call, and Adrian, the man who once walked into a church like darkness, was the one who enforced those rules the most. Ella grew up healthy and happy, with a real childhood, swimming in the pool, running through the garden, tea parties with stuffed animals, and a reading corner where she made Adrian do a ridiculous voice for the dinosaur who could cook. One night, Claire came home late and found her father and daughter sticking stickers onto a poster titled "Family Rules," written by Ella herself. "Mommy is always right. If Mommy isn't sure, ask Mommy. Alex has to do the dishes if he makes a mess." Adrian stood there with his sleeves rolled up, face serious, tape in hand like he was handling the biggest deal of his life. When he saw Claire, he only said, "Boss's orders." Claire laughed until she felt tired. And those laughs, Those ordinary, everyday laughs were proof she wasn't living in survival mode anymore. Ryan didn't disappear into the dark with a gunshot. He was handled by the law, exactly as Claire demanded, exactly as Adrian promised. The lawyers did the work. The financial evidence was airtight. The networks were dragged into the light. The extortion, the threats, the stalking, all of it became paperwork, became charges, became a price Ryan had to pay in months and years behind steel doors. No blood, no scene for Ella to witness. Sophie could finally breathe again. One evening, Sophie sat with Claire on the back steps, the two of them drinking tea like they used to before their lives turned onto this strange road. Sophie looked at Claire for a long time, then said softly, "I still can't believe I survived, and I'm happy." Claire touched her sister's hand. "Me neither." Sophie smiled, tears shining. "But I believe Adrian, not because he's scary, because he keeps his word." Claire looked through the kitchen window where Adrian was wiping down the counter. Ella sat on her tall chair, pointing and ordering, "That spot too." Adrian obeyed like a loyal soldier. Claire understood something simple. Some men are strong because they make the world afraid, and some men are stronger because they make the woman beside them no longer need to be afraid. The second proposal happened on a summer night. No church, no huge crowd. No one was looking at Claire like she was something to judge. No more abandoned bride from a year ago. Just the backyard. Warm string lights hung in the trees. The wind carried the scent of grass, and a small table held 2 juice cups for Ella and a glass of wine for Claire, like respect for the ordinary habits of their life. Claire thought it was just a family dinner, until Ella ran up, both hands clutching a small velvet box, her face solemn like she was conducting a national ceremony. "Mommy," Ella said formally, then turned to Adrian with bright eyes. "Papa Alex, this time we're getting married for love, okay?" Claire stopped. Her heart beat so fast she could hear it. She looked at Adrian. He stood a few steps away. No suit, no bodyguards, just a simple shirt and eyes deep as night, but without darkness. Only the peace of a man who had learned how to love without taking. Adrian walked over and knelt, but he didn't rush to touch Claire. He held his hand out to Ella first, as if asking for permission one more time. "Thank you," Adrian said warmly. "You helped your dad with something important." Ella nodded hard, then ran to hide behind Sophie and Jade, laughing, leaving a clear space between the two adults. Adrian looked up at Claire. "Claire," he said, no speech, no performance. "That day I walked into the church to fix what Ryan broke. But you fixed me, piece by piece." Claire wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to say, "Don't say that," but her throat tightened. Adrian opened the ring box. The ring wasn't flashy, just softly bright under the golden lights, like a promise that didn't need to shout. "You don't owe me," Adrian said. "You don't belong to me. You belong to yourself." Claire blinked, tears spilling. "And because of that," Adrian continued, "I want you to choose me again. Freely, clearly, no pressure." Claire laughed through her tears. "You're proposing and still giving me an exit?" Adrian laughed too, a rare, real laugh. "Habit." Claire wiped her tears. Then she looked at Ella, hands over her face, waiting like she was watching a movie. Looked at Sophie, crying while trying to smile. Looked at Jade, shaking her head like, "Girl, you really rescued a crime boss." And Claire looked back at Adrian. This man had once held the whole world in his hands, yet learned to hold her hand gently if he was afraid of hurting her. He had power enough to silence a room, yet chose to ask, "Is this okay?" before a kiss. He had ways to solve problems with violence, yet chose the law because she asked. Claire understood. Real love isn't something that steals your freedom. Real love is what makes you safe enough to be yourself. She nodded, still laughing, still crying. "Yes!" Ella screamed, "Yay!" and launched herself at Adrian's legs, then wrapped Claire too, 3 of them tangled into one warm knot beneath the backyard lights. Adrian held both mother and daughter tight, but not as if he were keeping them. He held them as if blocking the wind. Then he bent down and murmured into Claire's hair, soft enough for only her to hear. "From beginning to end, you were always the one holding the key." Claire closed her eyes, rested her forehead against his shoulder, and smiled like a breath. 5 years later, the house gained a new cry, a baby boy. Ella became both big sister and commander, running the home like a lovable little general. Claire worked busy shifts, but every time she came home, there was a hand taking her bag, a hot meal waiting, and a man who knew how to say, "Go rest, I've got this." Adrian was still Adrian, terrifying to bad men, cold as steel to anyone who tried to break his family. But to Claire, he was the man who did the dishes without complaining, read stories until his voice went hoarse, and still asked every night, "Are you okay?" A reminder that respect isn't just the beginning stage, it's the foundation. And Claire, the wife who was never a prisoner, sat on the porch holding her baby boy, watching Ella laugh in the garden, watching Adrian walk over with a light jacket and drape it over her shoulders like he was placing an entire lifetime of peace there. No captivity, no control, only companionship.